Before we get started with this interview, a reminder. If you or someone you know may be considering suicide, contact the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org. For TTY users, use your preferred relay service or dial 711, then 988. I first heard about the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, also known as AFSP, in April of 2016, when I was a junior at SUNY New Paltz. During a late Sunday morning walk around town, I got a call that a close friend of mine had died by suicide. He had been at our off-campus party the night before and was found dead in his dorm room that morning. His abrupt death stunned our friend group and the broader college community. As an editor for the college newspaper, I had to cover it as a news story before penning an impromptu and difficult obituary in the opinion section. A decade later, the pain resulting from his absence still lingers. I can't speak for all of my college friends, but I know that his sudden passing made me hyper-aware of behavioral health issues and stoked a desire to never see anyone have to experience something like that again. During my senior year the following spring, we worked with the Hudson Valley chapter of the AFSP to host an Out of the Darkness walk on campus. A few months later, while interning in Washington, D.C., I participated in another walk down there too. I've always had a healthy regard for the AFSP and its mission, which is why I was heartened to see the news 2 weeks ago that the organization was merging with the JED Foundation to form the largest suicide prevention nonprofit in the U.S. For the first episode of May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, I'm pleased to be joined by JED CEO John McPhee and AFSP CEO Bob Gebbia. In our conversation, the pair underlined the reasoning for the merger, how they plan to use their newfound scale to bolster suicide prevention efforts, and where medical marketers can improve messaging around mental health. And following that interview, reporter Bella Jakowski brings us a sit-down interview with former NFL star Delaney Walker from the 2026 Publicis Health Media Health Front. John and Bob, it's wonderful to have you on for this episode of the podcast, our first one of Mental Health Awareness Month. And obviously, there are so many topics I want to get into as it relates to how our audience of medical marketers and the brands they represent can do a better job communicating and messaging on that front. But before we get into that, obviously, the big news of the day is the merger between your two organizations. Very exciting, obviously caught my eye. Talk a little bit about the reasoning behind the merger. Like, what was the impetus for it?
I think the short answer is that the two organizations felt that if we combine and come together, that we'll be able to better serve our mission as a new combined entity than we would as two separate organizations. AFSP and JED are both very strong, impactful, established organizations. And through our conversations, what we discovered is that we're highly complementary in terms of the ways that we do our work. And so we felt after a period of discussion and due diligence that it was clear to us that there's a very strong rationale and putting these two organizations together would be better for the field and better for suicide prevention.
Yeah, I would just add to that, that this doesn't happen very often in the nonprofit world, and groups get entrenched in their own space and they don't think about merging. And we have a long history, our two organizations, of collaborating too, which I think we knew each other well, and that helped to kind of facilitate this. But I think the other important point to bring out is that we didn't have to do this. This was not out of necessity. As John said, we have strong finances, we have strong brands, we're impactful alone, but coming together, we believe we can be more impactful for the future. And it just, when we looked into it, just made so much sense. So it is a merger of two strong organizations, which again, doesn't happen often, but we're excited to bring this to the finish line and now have it happen.
Yeah, and you asked about the impetus. The impetus was Bob invited me to lunch and said, will you examine this with us? Is this something we could take a look at together? And so certainly very grateful to Bob for initiating that conversation.
I asked the question, and John's response, I was excited by that. And I knew there was some potential here. And some of it was also the timing. I think JED has grown so much over the years, and I'm retiring in the end of this year. My plans were to do that. And I just said, gee, maybe there's a way we can put this together, and John become the CEO. I think in the back of my mind, that was something I had from that very first lunch, that would be great for our organization, and to come together like this is really special.
And you made the point too, where it's, I have a sister that has worked in the nonprofit world for a while. Like, it's obviously not an easy thing to be able to put aside, differences in terms of organizational styles and missions and everything. But when it's for this greater good, that's obviously where it comes to. And I'm curious, you talked about obviously two very strong organizations coming together. Talk about what you expect to achieve in terms of scaling up your respective operations, because you both have a singular focus in terms of improving the dialogue and resources around mental health in this country. So how are you able to do that by putting all of your resources together?
Yeah, so this is going to be a really comprehensive suicide prevention organization focused on suicide prevention across the ages, right? So AFSP is the largest private funder of research for suicide prevention, I think, in the world, Bob, right?
Yeah, it is.
And AFSP has a very strong policy and advocacy effort as well, and then 73 chapters around the country with a large group of volunteers and grief and loss support for suicide loss survivors, and more, and education and awareness and more. And at the Jed Foundation, we focus on teenagers and young adult youth, through young adulthood, and this idea of really working to strengthen the systems and the environments that young people are in. So schools, school districts, colleges, community-based organizations. We do programmatic technical assistance, if you will, to help those kinds of organizations strengthen how they support mental health and reduce risk for suicide. And so when you put these two together, you can see they fit very, very well together. And so to your question, our vision is to grow the suicide prevention field and to grow and to see all of these pillars that each of us had alone come together and find the sort of connections and synergies between them and invest even more and scale even more in these core areas that we both have. And we think it'll be good for the field, to have a more unified player in the field, with significant scale and resources.
Yeah, and Jack, one of the things that we all realize who work in this field is that the suicide rate's was going up for 2 decades. From the 2000s to just not too long ago, and then we saw a slight dip before COVID, and then it went back up after COVID. Now it's dipped again, but if you step back, it hasn't really changed that much in decades. And we lose, almost 49,000 people every year in our country to suicide, and well over 1 million. The numbers aren't their estimates, but well over 1 million people who make a serious suicide attempt. And then you think about the people we lose, and then the impact on their families and friends and workplaces and school systems and communities. We have to do better. And I think a part of certainly the feeling that John has and I have and our boards have and our team members is we have to start to see a more sustained reduction in mortality. We need to have people understand more how this can be prevented, what they can do, how to help someone who's struggling. I mean, there's just so much to do. And I think that's been a motivator. We have to really start to turn this around. It's a major problem, a health problem in our country, and we have to address it. So, no, that's a big motivation for the things we see happening in the future with this combined organization.
It's a major task that you're going to be faced with. And I want to ask a question, in the intro to this conversation, I mentioned that I, like so many people, have lost somebody to suicide. I had a friend of mine in college who died by suicide. And it was after that had happened, there was a lot of us as friends and acquaintances standing around kind of being like, piecing together, like, what could we have known? What could we have done? What signs were missing, everything. And I'm curious from your perspective, what some of the biggest challenges are when it comes to suicide prevention. You talk about when it's young people, but it obviously spans different age groups and stuff. I think it's what people are always left with is like, what was the inciting incident? What was the rationale? Is there any closure we can get from this? Like, what are some of those challenges that you see in terms of being able to promote and advocate suicide prevention?
Yeah. Bob, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things we see is, upstream prevention. understanding that what are things people experience that may put them at risk, and if they are showing some signs that they're becoming despondent, they're changing in their sleeping habits and their connections to people, they're becoming isolated. I mean, all increased use of drugs and alcohol, things that we want to teach people. If you see that or you're experiencing that, get help, because the sooner you get help, the better the outcomes. And I think, so we want to see more focus on resiliency and training people and teaching people about this, more awareness of it and what to do. And then when people are in crisis, obviously to have, those services available. And we're excited about what's been happening in that space with 988 and the crisis line. And there was just an article that came out, talking about the drop in youth suicide prevention and tying it to more calls to the hotline and 988. So I think from my point of view, we have to do better in terms of educating the public. It's a public health approach, right through to getting people in crisis, the support and the help when they need it, and everything in between, including access to mental health services. It's in spite of the progress we've made, mental health parity has not been fully implemented. There's still people who cannot get access to care, afford that care, and go without it, and therefore don't seek treatment or don't get treatment, and then puts them at higher risk if they're really struggling and becoming, suicidal, having suicidal ideation and so on. So there's a whole spectrum, that needs to happen, from prevention to crisis and everything in between. And I think that's got to be the focus. We have to just learn how to do this better and reach more people, scale it.
John, I want to ask you a follow-up question if I can, which is, kind of broadening out a little bit. Obviously, you're focused on suicide prevention, but it ties right in with mental health. And we cover a number, whether it's a public health campaign, I think about all the different ad council campaigns we've covered over the years since I've been here, but also different brands taking that on by themselves, saying that, hey, we need to destigmatize this. And there's obviously been a lot of step forwards. A lot of people point to like when Michael Phelps came forward and said that he had dealt with issues related to depression. They're like, well, if this great Olympian has been dealing with something like that, it makes it easier for us to talk about that. But I'm curious, that was 10 years ago. There's obviously been all these advancements, but they're still not to the level that we want it to be. Why is it still so difficult from your perspective to talk about mental health or get people to talk openly about those topics?
Yeah. And so first to your point, there's been a lot of improvement around stigma and reduction in stigma. And there's certainly a lot more conversations happening today than used to happen. Although stigma continues to be an issue. We've done research on this question with young people about, what are the barriers? What holds them back from seeking help or going to a caring adult if they're struggling or they know a friend is struggling? And some interesting things came out of that. First, today's teenagers want to go to their parents first and do go to their parents more than their friends, which is a shift from the past. But while we see stigma going down, we actually see some other behaviors and attitudes rising, like a growing mistrust of institutions, a growing mistrust of older adults, a growing sense that help might not be helpful, some hesitancy about going to parents because they don't want to burden their parents or put something else on their parents' plates, right? And so I give these as examples because what I think we have to keep doing is, first of all, it's really important when your message in mental health, and I know you have sort of a marketing and media audience, right? Well, when Taco Bell is doing all kinds of market research before they're launching, their campaigns to try to change attitudes and behaviors. And I think it's really important in our field that we do the same, so that we really, really understand at a granular level and at a psychographic level, what are the barriers that are preventing help seeking and help giving, so that we can, sort of speak to those in very specific and effective ways when we do campaigns to try to promote help seeking and help giving. And if I could just say as a last note, I'm very purposefully saying help seeking and help giving, right? Mm-hmm. One set of messaging, of course, is the help seeking, which is, it's important if you're struggling to go get help. But the other is, and Bob spoke to this a couple of minutes ago, and a campaign that AFSP and JED did together called Seize the Awkward, that AFSP continues now with NAMI. is about help giving. If you're worried about somebody else, you see a sign, you have a gut feeling, then ask them, are you okay? Let them know you're there to talk to them and to help them. So I just think this is an ongoing thing that we have to keep focusing on, because attitudes, behaviors, barriers, they change over time.
One of the things, a good data point on that, to your question, Jack, we have been every couple of years been doing a public opinion poll through Harris. We commissioned Harris to do it. We've been doing it with the Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. It's been fascinating to see how that has changed over the years. So one of the fundamental changes is now 9 out of 10 people say they believe suicide's a preventable cause of death. That's a sea change from where it was certainly 20 years ago and 10 years ago. Going up, more people say, okay, yeah, I believe this can be prevented. Used to be, if someone wants to take their life, there's nothing you could do. And that was a prevailing thought, by the way, historically among healthcare professionals. They believe that. So that's a big change in the public opinion. The other thing is something like, 80% say they want to help or would help somebody, but over half of them say they don't know how. Well, that's an opportunity for education. Right? That's a sweet spot to say they want to help. The motivation is there, but they're afraid to. They're not sure what to do, how to do it. If we could educate more of those folks, well, I think that would lean into what John's talking about then helping somebody who they know is struggling, but they're not sure what to do. So I think these changes in attitude are important to keep tracking and to find the sweet spots. The other piece we learned is that most people think that mental health is really important. They don't believe their healthcare provider sees it the same way. About half say, we think it's important, but my healthcare provider doesn't. Well, that's another opportunity for some change. So attitudes are changing, but I think we have to work to keep kind of building it and facilitating, what to do with that change and how to make it more effective.
I think that last point you bring up is so relevant too. Like, I just had my physical a couple of weeks ago, and it was so interesting. Like, you obviously get your blood tested and you get height, weight, all that sort of stuff. Make sure you don't have a hernia or something like that. But then it's almost like at the end, it's like, oh yeah, like, do you feel depressed, lonely? It's almost kind of like a yada, 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 instead of like this bigger emphasis, which I think, to your point, is maybe more where we get to the HCP focused marketing rather than just the general public. But to that end about marketing, I'm curious on your end, because when we were preparing for this, I was looking back on some of the JED and AFSP campaigns that we had covered in the past. Again, the ad council has done a lot of great mental health work. I'm curious if there's anything that stands out to you just looking across the broader landscape where you're like, that's a mental health campaign or educational effort that really has worked and made sense. One that came to mind for me was the Bell Let's Talk. Like, that always goes viral online. It does a lot of good in terms of fundraising and really stimulating the conversation. But are there any other efforts that really stand out to you as saying, like, that's effective, that's the direction we should be going in?
Good question. I even though we created it with AFSP, I think Seize the Awkward is among the best, and that's with Ad Council also. Yeah. Love Your Mind right now with Ad Council as well. I think is a very strong campaign.
And there are other things, that have been out there, some specific to safe storage of firearms, for instance, things like that, really do help, as well. So I think we can't let up on it. The other thing is, where do people get their information? I mean, we keep hearing, just not even necessarily about our field, but, where do people get their news and everything? It's so spread out. It's not like the old days where you had a news channel you watched, on TV at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or something. People are bombarded, but the variation, how do you reach people? Where are the trusted sources for them? And then you look at certain communities where the LGBTQ youth get their information. Where's their trusted source, or other populations? And some of those populations, do have higher risk, and so I think it's finding those trusted sources and working through them and with them and partnering, that I think is a strong future piece for getting to people with the information, and getting it to it in culturally, appropriate ways and things that they'll relate to. The doctor in the white coat telling you what to do, pointing the finger, isn't going to work, And so I think we have to figure out, more ways. It's probably much, much more kind of diffuse and working through different channels and so on. So I think influencers on social media have actually been really great. And I know Jed has used them a lot, and we've used them a lot at AFSP. And I think that's a source we need to build on more, because they have a trusted following, and some of these followings are enormous. And I think working through those kinds of partnerships and sources and outlets is where we got to head, more of that.
Yeah.
I'm curious too. You talk about that fragmentation in the media, and obviously it's something that everyone in our audience, when they're either on the agency side or brand side, are trying to figure out, like, how do we get our messaging in there? To your point, it's not 3 network channels anymore. It's not cable. It's so diffuse, and it's such a challenge to be able to get in those right bloodstreams. But I wanted to ask you, like, there has been, and John, I think you brought up the point about the access part of this whole situation. Like, it used to be like, oh yeah, like you would have to go to your if you were able to get a therapist, you would have to go and see them and, like, in person. Now it's like, oh, you can see them online. There have been times where I see my therapist and we do a session over Zoom or something, but now it's gotten to where people are even kind of leaning into opportunities with talking to, like, AI chatbots and stuff. And that's further complicated all this. So, like, what do you make of, like, where the landscape is now in terms of people's access to mental health tools too? Because you can argue there has never been more, but there's still a scarcity issue with, like, actual credentialed psychotherapists or psychiatrists. And then there's the AI component of, like, what do you make of kind of where the landscape stands right now? Not necessarily good or bad, but just how do you evaluate that?
Well, there's a lot to say on this question. So first, I mean, structurally, we still continue to have an access problem, and it varies by, sort of geography. But also, let's not forget that we have a lot of people in this country who don't have insurance or who are underinsured, and that's also a big part of the access problem. I think the opportunity to do telebehavioral health has been a positive. Certainly, it's improved access. But we should recognize that, there are some things lost in being in a telesetting versus in person. You cannot tell if if I'm tapping my legs are bouncing up and down, and all kinds of other signs you might notice. But I think it's a positive. AI, a lot of people are going to AI for therapy, including general use AI, and I think that's worrisome. We need human therapists and psychotherapists, and I know people are going because it's fast, it's free, it's non-judgmental. But this is concerning, and things are moving so fast, and we don't have a regulatory framework for how to vet and approve AI delivered, sort of mental health care. And so this is something we're spending a lot of time at, on the JED Foundation, around policy, around regulation, and, trying to advise the companies around. But I would strongly advise, viewers to stick with traditional means, meaning human means of mental health care support.
Yeah, I would echo everything John said and agree. And I think we're at an interesting kind of intersection with that right now. I mean, there are two aspects to it. One is AI tools that are actually being created with mental health in mind, right? They're actually companies who say, hey, we could be helpful here. And they have more safeguards and things like that may be built in, but they shouldn't still replace the human element. They can help make it more efficient. You hear the stories. Therapists spend more time on paperwork and documentation, all that, than they do with the patient. And, can AI help reduce some of that burden so they can have more time with the patient? So I think there are some tools. We don't want to be negative about them. They may be very helpful, but probably at the end of the day shouldn't replace the human contact, at least not totally, at some point. We'll see. But the other piece is using generative AI for mental health support in ways it was never meant to be used. And that has more dangers. And the companies know it. And there's been some very high profile suicides among young people. And that's a place where we really have to look at safety and try to change things, whether through the companies, which is, one way, and they are aware of it. And obviously lawsuits are a motivator. Let's be honest, they're concerned about liability. But some want to do the right thing too. I don't want to be critical of them. And the other is obviously Congress is looking at this. States are looking at this. It's all over the place. And so I would just say groups like ours, our combined group, and other mental health groups, the NAMIs, the American Psychiatric Association, Psychological Association, SW, provider groups like that, the legislators and the companies need to work with the people that can help guide this. And I think that's a really important role for our organization and like-minded and partner organizations to try to influence the companies and our legislators if that's the road it goes, so we can make sure this is safe and effective and useful, not harmful.
No, and what you bring up there is so critical. Like, obviously, the demand is there, like the demand and interest, and to your point, kind of changing that narrative from where it was 10, 20 years ago in terms of how people perceive mental health and want to be able to go out there and get the care is night and day. On the flip side, too, with having these free tools that are out there, you talk about the generative AI ones. My wife watches a reality show, and there was a person on the show who had just gone through a breakup and was using Claude or ChatGPT, I forget which one, to kind of work through his emotions. And it was like a ha. It was framed in the show as kind of like this jokey thing. But you talk about these high profile suicides involving young kids that were, that are the subject of ongoing litigation. Like, that's the stuff where people are trying to go and seemingly try and get help. And then these things can turn on them or feast on their vulnerabilities and stuff. And it's a real concern out there. And it's something I think a lot of brands would be wise to say, how do we tap into the fact that people want access to these services, but not also maybe have the means or the ability or the direction to go and get that care. It's a real challenge out there.
Yeah, and certainly you never want to have a response, telling that person how they can take their lives, talking about means, and that we know that that's a real danger. And so, yeah, there's some real basic safeguards that have to be in place. So.
I really appreciate you coming on here. And again, I'm so in awe and have been for years of what your respective organizations have done. I'm so pleased that you're going to be coming together to further advance the mission that you work on. I want to leave you both with kind of the parting advice to our audience, who, again, they are marketers, be they at agencies or on the brand side. What can they do from your vantage point? How can they improve messaging around suicide prevention, around mental health? If there's anything you could leave them with, I think that'd be really meaningful.
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. First, there's so much more conversation about mental health happening now, and I think that that's a really, really great thing. But there are some watch outs. There's been some, I'd say, conflation sort of happening where, mental health is now a catch-all for sort of everyday normal human response to situations all the way through to mental illness. So I think it's important that we be really precise in our language, in different situations about what we're talking about. Are we talking about emotional distress? Are we talking about a mental illness, And in there is a risk that how we talk about mental health or the way we're talking about so much could trivialize, serious mental illness. And so just some sensitivities around that I think are important. Help seeking is incredibly important, which we've talked about here, but not every emotional response to every situation requires professional help seeking, and so I think there's, something in that space where, normal emotional response, even difficult response. We were just talking about my dog just died literally, right? And so clearly, a serious emotional response to that. So again, I think I'm trying to make this point just really about precision. And then when we talk about mental health, I think it's important also to recognize that there are structural and social determinants of mental health that are important as part of this conversation a lot of times. And I think sometimes they get left out. And then there's a focus or a responsibility in a way that's being placed on the individual without consideration for structural and social determinants and these kinds of things that, may not be totally fair.
Yeah, John makes a lot of great points there. I think the thing I would add is become informed, become knowledgeable about this. There's so much good information out there too, online and through our websites and other organizations that, have really good information for the public. And I think become informed, know what to do, should we all have mental health. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. And so, but we all have it. And I think John's point, we all have good days, bad days, stress. Life's very stressful, all this stuff. But when things are not going right, when it's more than just a bad day, I think people need to be aware and know what to do. And I think the biggest thing is informed. Other fields have done great on this, about prevention. We always talk about, the heart health field because it's such an easy one to draw parallels to. There was a time you didn't know you had a problem until you had that pain, had a heart attack and died. Well, I think that field has made tremendous progress about not smoking, eating right, getting sleep, exercising, checking your cholesterol, because there is a chemical part to this, right? Biological part, and what to do. And I think they've become informed. And I think we need to have the same parallels. They're going to be different, but there's parallels here about becoming informed, what to do. Don't wait until you're thinking about taking your life. That's the heart attack part. That's the chest pains part. Think about the upstream prevention and become informed and protect your loved ones, and the people around you that you care about.
Yeah. And Jack, I'll just throw out one other thing quickly, just because, your audience includes marketing communications professionals. As Bob talked about, sort of learn, there are safe messaging guidelines and recommendations for how to communicate about suicide and suicide loss that are important because, when you write about a report on a suicide, you can inadvertently cause harm depending on how that is approached or not. So that would be another place I would really encourage everybody in your audience to really learn about and understand.
And we'll include those guidelines. Those are on your website. We'll include those in our show notes too, because I agree. And I draw back to the introduction that we did for this episode is, I had to write about a suicide in the college newspaper, and I'd never done that before. And it was trying to learn of like, oh yeah, what's the language you use? How do you do it in a way that's very cautionary and doesn't encourage any sort of copycat behavior? So we'll be sure to include that in there, along with all these great insights that you shared, Bob and John. I really appreciate, again, the insights that you were able to bring here, but also the greater mission that you're after. It's really important for our audience to hear that.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
So last Thursday on day 2 of the Publicis Health Media Health Front, our reporter Bella Jakowski caught up with former NFL star Delaney Walker following an appearance on a panel. Delaney, in his post-playing career, has dedicated himself to raising awareness of prostate cancer, and you might have seen him in Novartis' Super Bowl ad alongside other tight ends, encouraging you to relax your tight end. Here now is that conversation with Bella.
Thanks again for sitting down. And again, that panel was great. I feel like I'm going to double back on some of the questions I'm asking you just by nature of, what we're discussing today. But I'd love if you could start off by telling me, trying to put yourself back in the headspace you were in when you first realized that you could use your platform to promote cancer prevention, to be an advocate in the health space.
Well, once I was contacted, and they had no idea that I lost a father-in-law to prostate cancer. So they reached out to me, and I was told about this campaign. And I was just like, at first you hesitate just a little bit. And like I said earlier, you only hesitate because it's not that this is not a problem. It's more of that prostate cancer is hard to talk about. Like I said, most men will avoid that question or push it to the back burner. So I had to understand that I will make people uncomfortable, but maybe for that moment, but that moment will save lives. So then that's when I understood, like, this is something I have to do. I have to be a part of it. And not just because it was a Super Bowl commercial, but because we can save lives. And my community, the Black community, we are struck by this. And it's not being talked about. So it was so easy for me to be a part of this campaign.
Yeah, 1 in 6 Black men diagnosed at some point is just crazy and staggering, and the inequities persist. But, it seems like we were discussing, or they were discussing on the panel, this campaign, a lot of pharma players are doing awareness campaigns around prevention and screening is chipping away at that, hopefully. Let me ask sort of broadly about what the feedback or reaction has been to you stepping into this advocacy role. And I'll ask both from like a professional capacity and also like friends and family and folks, I'm
going to be honest with you. You get good and bad. You know what I mean? You get good and bad. And what I say by bad, it's like sense of humor bad, right? People want to joke about it. Oh, you weird, tight ends. Why are you talking about them? Like, that's the stuff we don't need, right? That's the problem. That's what causes the real risk, because people think it's a joke. So like, you get the negativity, but you're going to get negativity with anything you do, because you can't please everybody. So like, I know that. And the guys that send the negativity, them the ones I really want. Them the ones I want to send information to, because they probably need it the most, because they're pushing it back. Something in their life has made them feel like I have to push my medical stuff behind. So I know that that's going to come. The guys who give me the feedback, the good feedback, they want to learn about it. They want the information. They want to be proactive. It's the people who give you the negativity. That's the ones you got to go after, because they're the ones who not going to be proactive. Them the ones who not going to get the screening. So, it's a win-win situation sometimes. You're going to get good, you're going to get bad, but we need to go after the dudes who give us the bad comments, who want to joke on us about this, because you need it the most.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds sort of reminiscent sometimes of like conversations in health class, and the boys in the back of the class that are sort of like razzing everyone and like, oh, like, uncomfortable, but it comes off as, making fun of, or,
And sometimes I feel like when a guy does that, that's a sign of hiding his weakness, right? He's hiding weaknesses. You're joking, you're laughing about something serious. Why?
Yeah. Right.
Because you're pushing something back.
Yeah.
And that's what we all starting to learn. We don't see that as men until someone put it in your face, like, this is what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And you may deny it, but you'll go home and be like, damn, I'm doing that.
Yeah.
And we all done it.
Yeah.
It may not have been for, health screenings, but it's for something. We all have done that.
Yeah, totally. What do you think positions you as, you have a platform, but specifically as an athlete, best to deliver messaging about healthcare? And I ask that because you were talking on stage about how athletes invest in every aspect of their health, are so on top of things, except for when it comes to this. Like, and that's everyone, but it's especially sort of ironic when it comes to athletes because of that investment in their health. So what do you think sort of like about being an athlete, about that standard of care, helps drive that message home or deliver it?
Honestly, I can't say that, I studied medicine. I don't have that background. What I do have is leadership. I've done it, for 14 years in the NFL. I led men. I led young men coming into the NFL. So I see it as being a leader with a voice, right? Because it starts with me. If I'm doing it and I am carrying myself the right way, I think other people follow that, because they seen the career I have. They seen what I've done in the league. They seen what I've done with my family. And sometimes I think that goes a long way when you're around your peers. In our line of work, they just watch what you do. And if I'm doing it correctly, sometimes that's what they want to do, because they want to get where I got. So if I can give a message about just being straight, narrow, and proactive about your health, I mean, some dudes are going to listen. It's two sides. You're not going to get everybody to listen, but the dudes I can get to listen, they're going to get those other guys to listen. So it starts with one. If you can get one guy talking about it, it's like a chain. It's like cancer. It spreads. It
Positively.
spreads.
Yeah.
But positive.
Yeah.
It spread. It's a positive cancer that we love. It spreads. And if you it just takes one. Because then that person, if he gets the knowledge, he want to spread that information. And it's like, information is key, right? Mm-hmm. So if we can unlock doors with information, you going to share it to everybody, every door you walk into.
Yeah. Yeah. And that repeated messaging is effective and, will resonate with folks. So let me ask, is there anything and let me just check time here. Is there anything that surprised you? You said maybe you had like a moment of hesitation when you first contacted about the campaign, but is there anything that surprised you about, the creative process, the reaction, anything like that?
I was surprised about the whole campaign, hearing it, seeing it on paper, the storyboards. You never know what the reaction you're going to get, right? Because like I said, this is a touchy subject, and we're talking about our rectums, and this is a real thing. Obviously, being able to use tight ends, but with the metaphor of an actual tight end, it goes a long way. Because it could have rubbed people the wrong way, but you have some of the best tight ends out there. So like when they hearing it, they like, wait, what? Like they trying to get the message, right? They trying to understand the message, but it is not hitting them in the face. It's like, here, take this. It's like, oh man, sense of humor, laughter, and then the message. And then they like, oh, damn, I get it.
Yeah.
That is funny.
Yeah. It doesn't come across as preachy. It comes across as entertaining, and then there's an association there.
And so I think that's what surprised me, because I didn't know how well the commercial was going to be. I've been told that was the best no, second best. the Coors or the Budweiser? I think the Budweiser topped it, but I've been told it was the second best commercial. People laughed, died. People still will send it to me on Instagram. Like I'm like, what?
You're like, I know.
I did it. I sat there for 5 hours. So that's what surprised me on how many. I can't say just like individuals that's in the community it like influence, but just my peers, people who reached out to me that played. I found out people had prostate cancer I never even knew had prostate cancer. Cats is hitting me like, yo, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I didn't know that. So like that made them reach out to me to tell me what they was experiencing, and I think that's what we need. Like, and I even told, I'm not gonna say his name, but I even told him, maybe you should come and speak to the team, because they need to hear this. You was just playing 5 years ago, and now you diagnosed with prostate cancer. So that's what surprised me. Just the way I feel like my peers took the message.
And you mentioned on stage that you had folks reaching out to you after the commercial aired, and they were like, I want to get involved. Like, how do I? And you were like, it's over. But do you see your sort of participation inspiring more athletes, former athletes, to get involved in this type of work?
Yeah, I do see them. I see this as a new avenue, right? And I'm going to say avenue when it comes to saving lives, not pharmaceutical companies, because that's a hard thing to, try to swallow in our work. But if it has something to do with saving lives, cancer, anything like that, cardiac arrest, heart monitors, I think the NFL, any sports avenue, actors, it's the avenue, right? We have so many followers. We have so many people who listen to everything we say. It may even be full of crap, but they take it and they go and tell other people. Yeah. So yes, why not? You know what I mean? Why not use the platform? Why not take advantage of everything you have at this moment to spread a message, right? That can save lives. So, hopefully more guys start to do this. More people see the light at the other side, and let's get people talking. Yeah.
I think the last question I'll ask you is, you mentioned, why you did this, like in part of the panel conversation, that you felt a responsibility to say something, both because you've been impacted personally and also just because, you have a platform and understand how important this is. Can you just talk a little bit more about that sense of responsibility and maybe what is coming next for you in the health advocacy space, if you can share anything?
I'm gonna start off and say this. Like I've always been a person that probably led the forefront. I did it with DUI and NFL. I was a big advocate of that. I was the first person to do that. I was hated for that, but it worked out perfectly. And in the NFL, I had felt like I had a responsibility because I was impacted by it. I was in the locker room. I never heard the conversations, and I was just telling them earlier, like, I didn't know what a PSA was until I started learning information about this. And so many dudes in the locker room don't know what a PSA is. So I felt it may be my responsibility to start educating these guys now that's in the locker room, or the guys who are at that age that need to get screened. And I don't know, it's in me. I can talk about it fluently. I'm not pressured to do it. And I think that's what makes it so easy for me to be an advocate for prostate cancer.
And that is, I think, ultimately what will reduce the stigma that we talk so much about and having these conversations.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the MM+M podcast. Be sure to listen to next week's episode when we'll be joined by Chris Charles, Executive Creative Director of 21 Grams, to discuss his role as a member of the Can Pharma jury. Take care. The MM+M podcast is produced by our editorial staff, Bella Jakowski, Lesha Bushek, Steve Madden, Jameson Fleming, and Jack O'Brien, with production and editing by Bill Fitzpatrick and Gordon Thaler. Listen to all episodes at mmm-online.com or wherever you get your podcasts.